right, I think we're ready to go. Still have a few more seconds. Okay, it's 6:30. How you doing, Kat?
I'm slightly nervous, but we're here.
I'm always nervous, so don't worry. We're bringing the same energy, but it's not just nerves, it's excitement, it's enthusiasm, because we are conversation, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go ahead and get my notes together for everyone. So once again, welcome, everyone. You are now watching Artist Blueprint, and today is episode 3, Inheriting Generational Healing and Rest. And I am bringing to you a beautiful woman, a wonderful spirit, an excellent artist, and that is Katherine Elena Hernandez, who I will introduce to you more formally in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you a little bit more about the podcast. Hear me, I'm talking about your podcast, not this. So this is a new live series, not a podcast, that streams on Facebook and YouTube Live. And I'm exploring art and culture, holistic wellness, and the politics of healing with featured guests. They're artists administrators, arts educators, all types of great minds, people who are talking about culture as influencers. And we're coming in to talk about various topics that are deeply engaged in social justice work, but particularly healing justice and transformative justice. So again, I have Katherine here. She is a poet, a podcaster, a journalist, and she is a worship leader. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that work later on in the interview. But today I brought Katherine to talk a little bit about the blueprint for her artistry. And before we begin, as usual, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land. And I want to acknowledge with honor and gratitude as I bring to you this conversation that we are coming together on the traditional land of the Lenape and Wappinger indigenous communities. And I continue to send my respect and thanks to the spirit of this land for welcoming and holding us. Now, I know many of you may be wondering which territories you're currently residing on yourself. So I'm going to take a moment to share with you the Native Land Digital website, which is a Canadian Indigenous-led non-for-profit who's created this website back in 2015. They recently incorporated in 2018. And on there, you can find a map of various regions and the Indigenous people whose land you may be on. So I'm going to share that with you now. Now, remember, we are streaming on both YouTube and Facebook Live, so bear with me. There's going to be a little bit of a delay, but I'll make sure that the links get up on both sides. So you can find it at native-land.ca, and I'm dropping that link in the comments now. I also want to honor and pay my respects to my past professor, Grace Aniza Ali. She is the truest inspiration for this work with the Artist Blueprint. As I've shared with you in the past, it was in her class that I learned about what it is to really research an artist and consider their blueprint for their work. And that is what has brought us this particular show. Now, she was my professor at City College, but she also teaches at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. She is the founder, editorial director, and digital curator of Note magazine. And I definitely invite you to check that out. It's focused on global artists using the arts as catalysts for activism and social change. So before we go any further, let me go ahead and drop in Native Land Digital's website. Katherine, thank you for waiting as I type all this up.
Of course. I'm just happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you, seriously. It's been a long time coming. I was stalking you for a while.
Okay.
All right, let's see. In the comment section here on YouTube, I won't leave you out. I know in the past I left y'all hanging. Okay, so where are we? So as you see, I am going to be dipping in and out of the comment section. So please feel free to lend us some of your questions and your excitement and enthusiasm to keep the conversation going. And yeah, thank you again for joining us. So everyone, my name is Kymani Jade, Kymani Jade for short. And again, you tune into the Artist Blueprint. I am an artist and educator passionate about transformative and healing justice. And I am coming to you today with Katherine Elena Hernandez. And Katherine and I first met actually earlier this year, right? It doesn't feel like it. It feels like a couple of years have passed because of the pandemic.
It feels like eons ago, truly.
It does. But we met in February. We met at Baruch College, where I still attend and you recently graduated from.
Yes, thank God.
Congratulations. Did you graduate this year?
Yes, I just graduated in the summer.
So how was that with everything happening right now?
It was as odd as these times are, but I'm super thankful for the professors that I had those last semesters because they really did everything that they could to try to just make the courses as engaging as possible for students in the midst of everything. They were super understanding of everyone's circumstances amongst the pandemic. And yeah, everybody was just trying to do the best with the cards that they were given during that time. So I really appreciated all of the effort that I saw going around.
Well, congratulations again. You are a 2020 grad. No better year, despite all that's happening. Great year to graduate. 2020. All right. So, yeah, we met at the Black Student Union's Black Futures Month event, Amplify Black Voices. And when we were there, you performed a wonderfully beautiful piece. And I remember I was recording all of the other performers. And when you started to speak, I had to put my phone down. And afterwards, I knew we had to connect. And I want everyone to have the opportunity to hear some of your work now. So if you don't mind, can you share a piece of your poetry?
Yeah, of course. It's always weird when somebody says like they enjoyed a piece or anything like that. But at the end of the day, it's always beautiful when something you create connects with other people. So I really appreciate that. This piece is the same piece from that night. It's called Accents, and it's a imitation of this amazing, amazing spoken word poet called Denise Froman, who speaks about her mother's relationship with her accent and her relationship with it and how she grew up with it. And I just really love that poem and I connected with it deeply, and I wanted to respond to it with experiences from my own home, from growing up in a Dominican household with people who spoke super, super Dominican Spanish. And it's so much fun to listen to, but it kind of has a life of its own. So this is Accents.
Accents.
I love the way my parents speak. It's kind of like before leaving DR, they tried to swallow as much of Santo Domingo as they could. Mommy stuffed caña between her teeth, and Papi brushed his tongue with plátano leaves before it was time to leave. Papi stripped the trees of El Campo bare of mangoes, slipped them under his tongue, and rubbed his lips red with merengue just to keep them warm during the winter. Their tongues have mountains that remind them of home, rivers with streams of soul, strong hands that can never lose their hold on the accents that point them home. Before Mama Goja died, her phone calls always rang with the same warning. Mira, acuérdate de mí. ¿Y tú no le vas a llamar a tu mamá? No te olvides de mí, mija. No te olvides. Never forget. Don't forget the picture of the homeland that your accent paints. When fragile teacup phrases threaten to shatter and break under the weight of your tone, when the right thing to say comes out with a twinge of misunderstood sazon, or when long days, stress, and homesickness makes English a burden, don't forget. Remember that your rolled R's are not stamps of alienation. They are banners of declarations. They are the pride of a nation. They are the sounds of generations. And for your information, I love the way my mother speaks. And my heart breaks cuando she thinks that her very speech is an impediment on her intellect instead of a testament to her efforts. Mommy shouldn't have to break and bend her tongue to make room for the English language, as if we have room in our veins to mix morisoñando with fruit punch. We will not lay our tongues flat to make way for these words. These words will break and ground themselves into the dust that we walk on and learn to make way for us. I like the way Mommy speaks best. You see, my parents have been force-fed silence for too long. People don't understand that they have too much plátano embedded into their taste buds to like the taste of quiet. They have too much adobo cooking in the kitchen, too much dembow to keep playing around, too much heart to keep playing around, too much bachata kicking their hips side to side, too much clave to clap to, too much hip, too much bone, too much blood, too much hope, too much dream, too much accent to keep quiet. To some, their ebroki English that is nobody good looking may seem like too much to handle. But to me, they are the cradles that held my lullabies. The sounds that first told me that I am beautiful, they are never anything less than elegant to me.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, when they held hands in a place lot filled with discarded heritage, their accents were always a stubborn compass pointing them to home.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
almost feel like this episode should be called Accents Healing. I really do. Inheriting Generational Healing. I love this poem. Thank you so much for writing it and sharing it here again. Oh my goodness. I feel like I would take this poem and create a book out of it, and the only poem in the book would be this, and then just pages before and pages after, just to make a statement. It's very rich, and I appreciate that, truly do. So I want to take this time now to formally introduce everyone to Katherine. Katherine Elena Hernandez is an Afro-Dominican born creative writer, journalist, and worship leader born and raised in the Bronx. Her work centers themes of diasporic Blackness, negritude in Latin America and the Caribbean, ancestry, religion, spirituality, and the fluidity and deconstruction of language. She is the recipient of the Rosalind Bernstein Prize for Arts and Cultural Reporting for her work as co-host and founder of Culture, a podcast of wise, and the Jerome L. Schulman Poetry Prize for her piece, Acuérdate de mí.
Acuérdate de mí. Yeah.
Acuérdate de mí. Yes. Okay. She is currently working towards a poetry collection entitled La Heredad que me ha tocado.
Yeah. La heredad que me ha tocado.
Oh man, I love it. A bilingual collection that examines topics of history and inheritance as it pertains to themes of history, healing, and the wholeness of truth. And Katherine wanted to make sure to shout out Kenneth Susie for capturing her headshot. So I wanted to do that now here too. All right, so before we move forward, I really wanted to take a moment to honor Hispanic Heritage Month, because I know that we were initially supposed to have this conversation during that period. And it's also, it's intrinsic to your work. It's who you are. So I really wanted to take a moment to honor that, because I know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that oftentimes when we think of Hispanic heritage culture, we don't think of Blackness and we don't think of Africa. And a lot of work that I'm doing right now with the New African Artivist movement is to center creative visionaries across the diaspora, you know, from our past, who create our future. And so you are that. And I want to talk about your work and what you're doing to actually create our future, right? To be a part of our legacy. All right. So you make it a point to name yourself as an Afro-Dominican creative. For those of us who are still learning, how do you define Afro-Latinidad?
Right. I think this has been a conversation there's been a conversation surrounding Afro-Latinidad for a very long time now. But most people have just now been entering the conversation of Afro-Latinidad. Afro-Latinidad is recognizing African heritage and Blackness within the Latin America and Caribbean countries and nations. And it's just another way of looking at the Black diaspora and looking at Blackness as a global identity, as something that can pertain and exist in multiple cultures and multiple areas. And I do want to make a point in saying that Afro Latinidad is brilliant. It is rich, and it's existed way before anyone could put a name to it. There was always Black people in Latin America. There's not always, but due to slavery, there were enslaved Africans in Latin America and the Caribbean who made their roots there and made of that their home after what was their home was taken away from them. Um, and I make a point of acknowledging that I am Afro descendant because it's true to who I am. When I walk outside, when my family and I leave our home, we aren't always racialized as Black. We are sometimes called Dominican, and a lot of times there's that conversation in the Dominican households where you ask, "What are we racially?" and they'll tell you Dominican, and I'm like, "Okay, that's a nationality, not a race." But and that was me stepping into who I was, my full identity, and knowing that I am Black. For me, that started when I think maybe 8 years ago now, when I started like my natural hair movement, as it did for a lot of women. And there was a privilege in that, and being able to step into that is a huge privilege, to be able to say I am discovering I am Black, when there are Afro Latinos who never had to step into anything, who were born Black out of the womb, who are racialized as Black when they walk down the street, who are seen and experience the same thing as Black Americans here in the country and Black people all across the world. So I make a point of saying Afro Dominican because, yes, I recognize my heritage and who I come from and the beauty in that. But I also know that when people think of Afro Latino, they think of me a lot of times. When we talk about Afro Latina, you think of, a lot of times in the context that I see it in terms of media, it's like big curly haired, like maybe what, like 3A to like 4A curly hair, but not explicitly dark skinned women or men. It's always kind of the more palatable kind of Blackness that people look at. And it's good for all forms of Blackness to be celebrated. But the form of Blackness that needs to be elevated and concentrated on is the one that gets the most attacked, which is those who are racialized as Black when they exit their home. It doesn't invalidate any other forms of identity of Blackness all across the diaspora, but if we don't pay attention to what needs to be elevated, then we're stuck in the same cycle. So I love being Black. I recognize myself as Black. And yeah, that's just something I carry with pride.
Thank you for that. You said so much. So this seems like a simple question, but I think it's important to answer. Earlier when we were talking, and even still, my mouth slips around these terms. I'm not really sure what to say, and I want to be appropriate. So we hear about Afro-Latino, Afro-Latina, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latin, Hispanic, Spanish. You know, what's your take on this particular conversation? What do you think is appropriate, and how do you identify? Well, you obviously identify as Afro-Dominican. We just talked about that, but yeah.
I think, like, now, I think when it comes to language, there's always like a tricky spot because we keep adding on to language as times grow, as people find a way to address things. And I think everyone can acknowledge that there is a power in naming things, and a power in being able to have a term for something, being able to call something what it is and have that be its word. And I think, like, the controversy, if it exists though, surrounding Afro Latinx is, um, it's fun. It's funny in a sense, in that an Afro Latinx person is just a person of Afro descent, and we want to be more inclusive of all those who are non-binary or don't identify with any specific gender, and just make sure that they're also included in that conversation. Because if they're not included in the conversation, then the conversation is not worth having. Um, and yeah, I think it's a case by case thing. I identify as a woman. I am a woman. And so I'm fine with people addressing me as an Afro Latina. But at the end of the day, it's just another way of saying Black. Like, we are Black people. Um, some of us are, like I said before, are more racialized as Black. Some of us are Black descendant, African descendant. Um, yeah, and that's just a term that we use to acknowledge it. And I think it's a case by case thing. You ask somebody what their pronouns are, you ask them how they want to be identified, and you go according to that. And I think that's just a matter of respect. That's how you engage in conversation with people. Like I ask you for your name when I meet you, and that is how I address you. So I will ask how you would like to be addressed, and that's it.
Right. You talked a little bit about also being called morena and negra in Spanish speaking communities, which I think is beautiful. I remember walking down the block and hearing people tell me, because I grew up in what I thought was Spanish Harlem before I learned about El Barrio.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Spanish Harlem. But I grew up with a lot of Dominicans and then a couple of Puerto Ricans and then Jamaicans and that sort of thing. And I would walk up and down my block and I'd always hear morena, morena. And it just felt so good to hear. I was like, yes. You know?
And with morena, in terms like morena are terms of endearment in a lot of Caribbean and Spanish speaking communities. But there's also kind of like almost a history to it too, because yes, people are called morena as a term of endearment, and it's also a lot of times regardless of race or how you are racialized. A lot of people who are lighter skinned will be called morena as a term of endearment. But what we realize is that it's used in terms of almost in terms of like ownership, saying mi morena, my morena, you the person who I am seeking, you the person who I think is attractive, you who I'm kind of like saying, hey, it's like when you like, hey ma, like it's for a specific person whom you have an intention or regard for. And then we kind of feel that shift a little bit more when we hear negra. Negra explicitly means black. Um, it's literally from the word negro, right, which means black in Spanish. And a lot of times it's used as a term of endearment still, but well, not but and it's also has been used in the past as an identifying factor. Like you can't walk outside and be anything but negra. You can't walk outside and be anything but this one thing. So like many things, like many words in our languages, we hold the complexities of all of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. So let me just, how has your experience as an Afro Latina shaped your life? There, we talked about this. There exists some controversy over who has the right to claim Afro-Latinidad. And you spoke before about what it is to hold multiple truths and complexities as valid. So can you speak more to that?
Yeah, of course. When it comes to Afro Latinidad, again, like I said before, I didn't know or step into my blackness and who I was as a black woman until relatively not too long ago. And that is valid. That's the truth of the matter. I grew up in the Bronx. I went to school with a lot of Dominicans, with a lot of Puerto Ricans, with a lot of Black Americans, and no one in that space ever looked at me and identified me as Black. It wasn't until I went into high school where when I started like reading more and I started visiting open houses. For some reason, I was a freshman in high school visiting open houses to different colleges that I wanted to go to because I was just so set on wanting to be a writer and wanting to be a journalist. And when I entered these spaces, and I would sign up for a lot of surveys. They would ask you like, oh, what is your race? And that race question, for most of the time, it usually goes hand in hand with the ethnicity. So you have an option to check off Hispanic, Latino, or Black. But in a lot of the ones I was receiving, the Hispanic Latino was on one side and the Black was on the other. And it was just a question because I had no box to check. And that kind of led to me realizing, oh, maybe this is a deeper question. And then that was within the same time that I decided I was going to let my hair go natural. And what does it mean for me to have this hair, to have these attributes? And I received a lot of backlash from it, um, not from a lot of like outside places, but from within my own home, from within my own community. My mother was just like, okay, you can do this for now, but once there's a special event, I need you to straighten that out and fix it. my dad, dice, my dad to this day is not a fan of my curly hair.
Okay.
To
Yeah.
this day is not a fan. He's just like, he has like a joke with me where he goes, wow, so much. When are you gonna straighten again? And it's been like almost 10 years and he's still like,
Right. Anytime now.
yeah, anytime now. And yeah, like I've mentioned this before and I keep mentioning this because I feel like it's so important that when it comes to Afro Latinidad and how it shapes people when they're growing up, it's the people who are Afro Latino, who are from these countries, who are racialized as Black, who walk outside and are seen as Black people until they start speaking Spanish and are asked about their heritage. I feel like it's those individuals who um, fully kind of represent what Afro Latinidad is in terms of a Black diasporic community and as an identity. And as I said before, also like all of these spectrums of Blackness are valid too. So I realized that my experience is valid when I started reading poems and works by authors like Elizabeth Acevedo and Gabriel Ramirez, who talked about being Black and Dominican, being Black and a Latina, and like from all these heritages, I realized that there's just so much more to me than just being from this one country. It's more than just this one country, it's this whole experience. And funny enough, I began to be um, racialized as Black more once I stepped into that identity, once I wore my hair out more curly, once um, and it wasn't even so much outward appearance, but just so much in how I carried myself. Not that there is any explicitly Black way of carrying yourself, but just people would identify me less and less as Dominican and have more questions and more confusions regarding me and what I present to them, which I feel like is also another conversation in and of itself. But growing up, it's always been part of who I am, but now it is something that I actively acknowledge and make sure that people see whenever they speak and engage with me.
Right. Right. So over on Facebook, Christoph, thank you for joining us again. He says, wow, this is deep. It took me a while to embrace the Moreno moniker. Coming from the West Coast, it was so very different culture-wise. Thank you for adding that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay. So I just shared a link to Elizabeth Acevedo's poem Afro Latina
Yes.
on Facebook and YouTube. And I'm going to do the same for Gabriel Ramirez's poem on realizing I'm Black.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two other great poets whose work I encourage you to follow. So thank you for sharing that, Katherine.
Of course. Thank you for amplifying it.
Of course. As soon as you have your book, as soon as you're done, let me know. It's going to be on my bookshelf for sure and all over. I might even do a book review on you.
Please.
Really excited for your work. Okay. So let's jump back in. So you talked about doing a lot of research into your own heritage and your family history in our previous call. And give me 1 second. Scroll up, scroll up, scroll up. And in doing so, you learned a lot about your lineage. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. My family, my family were all from the Dominican Republic. I am a first generation person here. I don't know. I was just born here. Everybody else was born in DR. That's how I always say it. And yeah, I always had, I think children of immigrants always have this really weird connection back home. There's a term flying around called el nier, of ni de aquí ni de allá, neither here nor there. You kind of exist in this in between point of never fully being Dominican enough or native enough to claim whatever you can claim from the island, but then also not being fully American enough to be able to fully claim whatever you can claim here in the United States. And I think a lot more people within this identity are kind of more comfortable creating like some hovering island between here, the United States, and wherever they're from. But in terms of my family, my Mother's side of the family, we are from Barahona in the Dominican Republic, which is like a small, in a small coffee plantation. And my father's side is from the capital, which is like this big hub of just of a lot of mixes. And yeah, and like, and there can be a joke there about everybody in DR being from La Capital too. But yeah, my mother's family is more racialized as black. We are considered black, and I never wondered, I never questioned, up until the point where I started wondering and questioning about myself, and when I started digging deeper and asking my mom about like our family heritage and where are we from, and she's like from DR, and I was like, okay, but where in DR? Like how DR? Like were we always there? She was like, yeah. She's like, yeah, we've always been there. What are you talking about? And then that led me to talking to my grandfather and to my grandmother, and they were just like, yeah, we've always been here. We've always been here. And my grandfather was like, yeah, and somebody there is from Haiti too. And I was like, okay, what do you mean somebody? He was like, I think my grandfather or my father actually. And then he's like, no, my father is actually Asian. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for keeping this some small secret for forever, or like this, not even a secret, but something that is so inconsequential that is just ignored and forgotten. And given the history that the Dominican Republic has with Haiti and all that tension that exists in that history, I was just found it really interesting that that was just something that never got talked about, never mentioned with as much pride as we talk about our Dominican heritage and our Dominican history. So yeah, so that's basically like the full rounded thing. My parents came to the US around what 30 years ago, and they've been married all that time. They're mad cute. They've been married for like 35 years. Um,
That's beautiful.
yeah, and they just been incredibly inspiring people. And I think all of the history and lineage that I've seen in my family has been incredibly inspiring, whether it be stories of um, family plantation workers working together to grow coffee out in a farm, or an entire strip of a beach where my grandfather grew up that was owned by all of his family members, and they would all collectively work together across like this huge beach. And it's just like these stories that I see within my family's history that I always found to be super beautiful.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about how learning about your family's history deepened your sense of heritage and discovering different Afro Caribbean poets, but also other people in history. So you talked a little bit about Schomburg, Arturo Schomburg, for example, and you shared some history about Jose Francisco Peña Gomez. Can you
Yes.
talk about that again? Because it was so fascinating for me.
Yes, so a lot of Dominicans might know about Jose Francisco Peña Gomez. He was one of the mayors of the city of Santo Domingo, and he was a Dominican of Haitian descent. His parents were Haitian, and they worked right on, not too far from the border between DR and Haiti. And during the time, this was during Rafael Trujillo's regime within the Dominican Republic. And for those of you who don't know about Rafael Trujillo, he was a U.S. Marine trained dictator who was placed in the Dominican Republic around the time when like the Red Scare and communism was acting up, and he is considered to be a terrorizing force in DR. He ordered the well-known Masacre de Perejil, the Parsley Massacre, in which it's estimated that over 20,000 Haitians of Dominican descent and Dominicans of Haitian descent were murdered across this border that exists between DR and Haiti, which is actually just like a river. It's called the River Nahabon, and which is now also regarded as the murder river because of what happened there, and the way that guards would see who is Haitian, or who they considered Haitian, which was a very thinly veiled way of saying black. It was done by asking these people to pronounce the word parsley in Spanish, perejil, and people who grew up around Haitians would say it with the Haitian accent. And if they said it with a Haitian accent, they would be murdered. So Jose Peña Gomez, his parents were murdered in that massacre, and he went on to be adopted by and raised by the owners of the plantations where his parents worked. And he ended up going to school, studying to become a lawyer, and ended up running for presidency 3 separate times. And every single time that he ran for presidency, he was always beat out. And it came to a point where he was running against Joaquin Balaguer, who was the president who was in Trujillo's office while he was in power. And a lot of people call him. There's like a saying that in Spanish that después del diablo viene el demonio. That after the devil comes a demon. Um, and he was kind of considered this man who didn't do his best for the country because he still sustained and held in place a lot of the policies that Trujillo held. And they ran against each other. And when a lot of well known Peña Gomez supporters went to the voting booths to vote, over 200,000 of them were not found in any of the records. And so there was something went wrong in all of the system where they weren't allowed to vote. And Peña Gomez lost that election by a 0.7% margin against Balaguer. Like it was just not even an entire percentage point, but he ended up losing, and it was just an outrage, and everyone in the DR was outraged, and not I think within a year maybe with of his term, Balaguer had to step down from office just because of all the allegations that came forward and all of the suspicions surrounding that campaign. Um, when Peña Gomez ran again for the fourth time, when everybody knew that he would win, he ended up dying 10 days before the election. So it was a heartbreaking loss, but he was a tremendous mayor. He was a mayor of, again, the capital city of Santo Domingo. And he was very much considered the people's man. He was considered someone that every person within the island can identify with because he was so hardworking, because he had spent time working in campos and things like that. And he was also well educated. And yeah, currently the airport in Santo Domingo, el Aeropuerto de las Américas, is named after him. So yeah, he's just like this figure that's always stood in my mind because I've tried looking for like biographies of him and things like that because his story is just so um it's just such an incredible story, and I couldn't find anything, but yeah, I just identify not identify with but I just think his story is incredible, and I would have loved to see what DR would have looked like today if he had become president.
Yeah, I do agree that it's an incredible story, and we don't learn a lot about Black history here in the U.S., and so to even hear in the Dominican Republic that there are Black figures, who stand out there as well, um, is important to share. You also talked a little bit about the Garifuna and what you learned about them. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the Garifuna people is an indigenous culture, an indigenous community of people who live off of the coast of Belize, Nicaragua, and Honduras. I, I have that right, yeah. And they're an indigenous people who their story comes that an import of enslaved Africans landed in St. Vincent and were able to rebel and run away from the people who were trying to enslave them, and they ran off and settled along the coast of Central America. And these are people who are indigenous, native to these lands, and they're just incredible. Their story, their culture is beautiful. They've been on these lands for years, for centuries even, and they're brilliant. They're just entities of of brilliance. And when a notable Garifuna uh, journalist whom I admire so much is Janelle Martinez. She is an amazing journalist who is a Garifuna woman, and she makes a point in covering all of these amazing cultures within Afro Latinidad, and outside of it as well. And the Garifuna people, surprisingly, the largest population of Garifunas outside of Central and South America is in the Bronx. A lot of them have traveled out here and settled out here and created like all of these communities. And it's beautiful to see them thrive and see them make homes for themselves and for others in their communities. And there's been a lot of attack on Garifuna community in Nicaragua and in Honduras, where a lot of outside tourist companies want to come in and basically run over their land and create their resorts. And so a lot of incredible Garifuna activists like Miriam Miranda have gone and have protested against this, have gone and have literally risked their lives. There's Garifuna activists who have been killed and are gone missing, and people cannot find them because they have spoken out against the attack on their lands. And honestly, what they want to do is preserve their culture in the lands on which that culture thrives.
Okay, so much rich information. I'm sharing Martinez's Twitter handle for everyone who may be interested in following her. And you had mentioned another journalist, but I want to move on and add that link later.
Yeah, of course.
Because I want to talk also about your own journalism, of course. And then your poetry. So as a poet in particular, as a writer, as a journalist, what do you seek to do? What is the mission for your work?
The mission for my, well, overall, I think like if you ever go into a writing workshop or anything like that, one of the questions you get asked a lot that I think go hand in hand with this is like who your audience is. Who is your audience? What do you want to do with this work? And I always think that the first audience that you write for and who your work and who decides the mission of your work is yourself. And I don't mean that in like a self-centered way or anything, but in that it takes a certain level of self-awareness, I think, to write about anything at all. It takes a level of self-awareness of being able to put words to paper, pen to paper, anything like that. So I think one, I want to gain that or increase that self-awareness within myself and checking my biases, checking my privileges, and making sure that those, not that they are constantly at the forefront of my mind, because then I would not be able to like look at any other stories outside of who I am. And I do believe that there are other stories outside of who I am in the communities that I represent that deserve attention and elevation. But when it comes to the mission of what I want to do, I just want people to engage with and recognize different cultures across the diaspora and give credit to where credit is due and give honor to where honor is due. I think it goes without saying that Black people, it's, I think the well-known quote is that Black women are the most underprotected people on the face of the planet. And I think that the mission of a lot of my work is trying to reverse the damage of that, and wanting to reach out to people who have done the damage or who represent those who have done the damage and hope that they can engage with the work and just start up on a process of healing with the community. And yeah, just bring attention to people and things and cultures that need the attention, that deserve the attention, that I love, that I identify with, that I think is just awesome or great. Finding truths within every area, within every aspect of what I engage with, whether it be poetry, whether it be journalism, whether it be activism or worship. There's truth in all of these things. So I guess my mission is to promote that truth in any way that I can.
Okay. Well, today's episode speaks to healing. It's generational healing. We hear a lot about generational wealth, and we know that health is wealth. So I want to talk about some of the generational trauma that we carry as Black people and also as Black women in particular.
Yeah.
Can you share some of that, like your views on that?
Yeah, of course. I think there is one of the biggest traumas that I think is getting a lot of attention now is just the anti-blackness within Latin American communities. And from coming from a Dominican background, whew, is there. It's there. It's there. There's no way to not claim it. There's no way to deny it. It is there. And if you're one of the people that says, well, blackness works differently, race works differently in Latin American countries, then you are also contributing to that trauma. Because Latin American history, especially, and I can speak to the Dominican Republic. I want to be able to speak as much to different countries, but in the Dominican Republic, there wasn't an explicit um, racialization of law the way that there is and exists in the United States. There was no clear segregation, but it's there. It's present. It's present in when Trujillo changed the census. And instead of having people identify as Black or white, he had them identify as Dominican or Haitian, with Haitian meaning Black and with Dominican being white. And it's there in how Haitians are treated today, or and how Dominicans will claim that it is for instances for some spirit of nationalism, when in reality it is racism. And just internalized anti-blackness as well in trying to this idea of mejorar la raza is something that is present in the Dominican Republic. Mejorar la raza means to better the race. It is this idea that you must marry someone that is lighter skinned or who is more who holds more European features in order to better the population, to create more um, of more people who distance themselves from being racialized as Black. Um, and that is all trauma in and of itself. And there's also traumas of the effects of that. I know women, Dominican women, who at the age of maybe 8 or younger have started relaxing their hair and have scars, literal scars from like burning their hair, or women who have suffered from like skin lightening creams and things of the like. And also Black women who have literal scars from being attacked, from um, holding arguments with people over things that they can have access to and things of the like. And I think one of the most traumatizing things about that is that it all comes, in my experience, when it comes to the Dominican Republic, from our own people, from our own community. Um, there's a saying that like all skin folk are not kinfolk. And a lot of times I always thought like, oh, as soon as I meet, a lot of times growing up, it was like, if I meet another Dominican, we're gonna be tight because we're probably all cousins anyway, right? And realizing that that's not the case. That's not the case all the time. Like I know that there are Dominicans who are racist white supremacists, right? There are Dominicans who hate the idea of Blackness existing on the island, who refuse to acknowledge that race is even a thing that needs to be addressed within the island. And that refusal is part of that trauma that needs to get dealt with. Um, so yeah, when it comes to like my own family, I think of how my father just hated me and my natural hair. And that might seem, in the grand scheme of things, like nothing to most people, especially those who are racialized as Black and who are Black as they walk out their house and walk out the womb. They never had to step into anything. And yeah, but for me and people who deal with those things at home, for me, it was kind of him saying the one thing that I recognize as Black on you, I will refuse it. I will hate it for the rest of my life. Because it is also a recognition that there is something Black within me. That I am Black. And
It was
I
his
refuse.
conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's just like, I refuse to recognize that within myself. And a lot of times if I bring up themes of Blackness to him, he'll say, why don't you recognize indigenous roots as equally as you do Black roots? And I say, well, where are the indigenous populations within our island? They are there. Yes, they are present and those are part of our heritage. But you cannot claim the 2% of Arawak over the 80 something percent of African heritage that you have. And it doesn't even need to be boiled down to percentages, but the denial of one thing that you are is a denial of everything. It's a denial of a wholeness of who you are. So, yeah.
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was all.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
We should also talk a little bit about the heaviness of the history between DR and Haiti, you know, and what informed some of that racism.
Yeah.
So yeah, what can you tell us?
So Haiti and DR has had a long history. We've had a long history. It is one of the island of Hispaniola. It is called Hispaniola, but the original name is Ayiti. Is the native Arawak name of the island, and later on, one of the other indigenous names that were adopted was Quisqueya, and that's one of the more well known. But the original name of the island is Ayiti. So when
Hard to talk about.
so when Christopher Columbus and all his stupidity arrives to the island, um, and so many things happened. Right, we understand that he truly just abused of of the natives that were there and all of the history that was there. And when Bartolome de las Casas, who was a priest who um, defended defended in the indigenous people of Haiti, he did so by kind of finding a compromise and bringing. He was the one who suggested and brought in the first slaves into the Caribbean, the first enslaved people to the Caribbean. And when they arrived, at one point, the island was split between the section that is now Dominican Republic, that was colonized by the Spanish, and um, the section that is now Haiti, that was colonized by the French. We know that. Now, when we talk about independence in DR, the independence that we recognize and that we celebrate on the 27th of February is from Haiti, from the land that was of Haiti. And we, in Dominican history, will speak of it as liberation from the French regime, from the French rule. Now, if you look at Haitian history, it's seen as a rebellion against Haiti's attempts to unify the island against outside European um, influences. And the crazy thing is like right after DR gained independence from Haiti or from the French, they were occupied for like a brief hot second by the Spanish. So the immediate thing that happened afterwards was what Haiti feared against. Um, so yeah, there's this history of tension where different histories are being told and being experienced on either side of this island. We have Dominicans thinking um, Haiti is an extension of French rule that wants to occupy the whole island, whereas Haiti is looking at DR as those who do not want to unify with us for the liberation of the entire island. So that itself, that those different histories will produce tension. But on a more micro level, there is intermarriage and just so much travel amongst either side of the island that it further complicates these things. There's so many Dominicans of Haitian descent and Haitians of Dominican descent, as we saw, um, just get further traumatized in the Parsley massacre under Trujillo's regime, that it just complicates it even more. It's not messy. It is what it is. It is complex. And to know that these sides, these histories, these people who decidedly have tensions when it comes to historical and political things, but when it comes to personal level, there are so many intermarriages, so many traveling back and forth from either side of the island, um, that things just don't decide where they fall and where they stand. You have people who are Haitian coming over to Dominican households and taking care of their young and cleaning the house and doing all these things and being friends and host and being in the same community and thriving together. But then when the moment comes, a lot of Dominicans choose to abuse of Haitians. And a lot of, like, I think currently there's a lot of hate towards Haitian immigrants going into DR, and because Haiti is suffering from a lot of impoverished situations, and it's the same rhetoric that we see here in the United States about immigrants of, oh, they're coming and taking our jobs, oh, they're coming and occupying so much space, when in reality it's just them living. It's people living and trying to make a way for themselves and for their families. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think are some of the commonalities between the healing tools we hold? What are some of those healing tools?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest healing tools um, that I can identify for myself is being able to recognize truths as something that cannot be black or white, but something that is. Um, Holding complexities and holding things to be true as they are. Like um, looking at my father, for example, I love and respect my father as he is. And at the same time, I recognize that there's a lot of anti blackness within him. And my love for him exists in not just in spite of that, but it exists with it. They both exist in the same space, and I can hold those two truths at the same time. And we have to find the ability to do that within ourselves and within our histories. And I feel like that will bring a lot more healing to people, being able to say these two things that are that the existence of them is controversial, but they're both true at the same time. And I have to live and exist with that. Now, what that doesn't mean is that I need to be complacent. I can also work towards making one of these truths not non existent, but just working towards a better goal. When it comes to when I think of Christianity and the church, and I think of how racism and issues of class aren't spoken about in the way that they need to be in church. I think those are truths that can be held. We can recognize that there's a common theme in Christianity in a lot of like Protestant Christian churches where a lot of people follow the idea that all authorities must be respected according to what the Bible says. And a lot of Christians recognize the president as the utmost authority of this land, and therefore we must respect and submit to him. But we can also hold multiple truths. We can say, yes, there are authorities. And the other truth that we must hold is that we can hold these authorities accountable, hold these authorities accountable for whatever issues that they cause, whatever tension that they create, and whatever disrespect that they show. And that is also true and also well within our rights. And those are the kind of complexities that we have to hold and realize that are true. And so that has been one of the biggest healing tools for me.
Right. Okay. So you spoke even in your poem about language and how language, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so how language is so integral to culture and how culture is shaped and how it shifts. So how do you think our language expresses our need for healing and how we can heal?
Yeah.
In particular.
I think that when it comes to language, language is an ever growing thing. I think that language is an ever growing tool that we can use. And, like, for example, the term Afro Latino, right? This didn't exist 30 years ago, right? We didn't have names to things. We didn't have terms for things back in a certain time. And if we don't, and I'm not saying that names are necessary in order to deal with something, but it does help immensely in being able to address something like negritud, a term like negritud, a term like intersectionalism, like all of these things that we did not have words for. That the idea, the concept of them did not exist in our minds, but they do now, means that there's some kind of progress, some time of forward movement. And I think our language expresses that. What I will say is that by the time that our language expresses it, a lot of times it means that enough conversations were had to able to come up with that term, to come up with a language or vernacular to surround it. And so what we need is more conversation that leads to action. It is brilliant to have these terms for these issues, right? It's or these identities for these things. But if we leave it at creating a term and just naming something without dealing with it, then we move nowhere. Then we're in a constant cycle of just conversation. And talk is great, and talk can lead to a lot of healing, but it's the actions that come out after that healing, after that conversation, is what really is going to solidify the healing that needs to happen within a community or within a history.
Yes. So before you had talked about how we are going to either further heal or traumatize ourselves and others. So I know that you're also a podcaster and a journalist.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about your award-winning podcast in a moment. But first, I want to ask you, how does your work, all of it, your writing, your journalism, how does your work reflect or challenge the embedded politics in history?
I think that it challenges it by exposing truths where they stand. I think that if you just not expose, but if you bring forward truth wherever it is, that it's truth is powerful in that it will stand in its own. You can bring it forward and it will stand against whatever it is that you are bringing it to the light for. So when it comes to journalism, it's about finding the truth of a situation, of a story, of bringing forward what happened, who is here, what are the truths that are reflected here, and what does that mean for the overall. Bring it forward, it will stand against whatever. When it comes to poetry, it's a meditation on these truths and bringing those forward. When it comes to podcasting is kind of like a modern day version of oral storytelling, which especially in Dominican culture, is the main way that we share stories. Like it's the oldest form of storytelling is oral storytelling, and I think that podcasting is just like an archived and internet shared way of doing that. And stories are all based in one way or another in the telling of truths. There's always some seed of reality in some story or another, and yeah, in the work that I do, whether it's journalism or fiction writing or poetry or anything, there's always going to be that element of this is the truth of this situation. This is the truth of my situation. This is the truth of the story that I'm reporting on. This is the truth that I am meditating on in this poem. But the presence of that will void any, I guess, sway that people will try, not people, but society will try to place onto the situation. So if I'm speaking about my truth as a Black woman, that is true. Yes. Whatever society may want to sway upon that cannot stand against that truth. Whatever is true within a story that I write about in journalism, as a journalist, my first priority, my first responsibility is to the public that I am trying to report to, right? So I am obligated to bring them the truth. And that truth will stand against whatever the public might say or do or want, right? And as journalism should. So yeah, I think truth in its essence will be able to negate any of these, will be a tool to negate these challenges that society or politics tries to bring forward.
Thank you. So I want to go to the comments really quickly. We're going to have to rewind to go forward.
No worries. Oh, I hope I remember everything I just said.
No, it's fine. It's a simple question. Christoph asked, well, he says, I am curious, what separates Latinidad from Afro-Latinidad?
Right. Culture-wise. There is an awesome woman that I follow called Dasha Polanco, who is a Black Panamanian woman. And she recently did a collaboration with The Root speaking about this. Latinidad was not made with Black people in mind. It was not made. And similarly, the way that the United States was not built, the Constitution was not written with Black people in mind. It was not built um, to reflect the truth of all men are created equal. And I think the same thing exists in Latinidad. Latinidad holds no space for Black people. So we've claimed Afro Latinidad, we've claimed Blackness, we've stepped into that and we have made it our own. And the difference is that Latinidad will tell a Black person that they are only Latino, that they should ignore the whole Black part because that just causes division within Latinidad. And that I think is the issue, is that you should be able, like I said before, to hold many truths and be Black in any space that you are without having to negate it to make anyone else or make sense in any culture. So Afro Latinidad legit just means Black. That's it. It's
Right.
Black in the Spanish accent.
So we spoke a lot about culture, and culture is the name of your podcast, Culture, a Podcast of Wise. So can you tell me a little bit about what it is, how it was created, how did it come to be?
Yes. So culture, how it's spelled is it's a narrative podcast where my co-host and I, shout out to Tim Seaberger and Seth Serrate. I love ya with all my heart. They're my co-founders and my co-hosts on the show. I love ya to death. I love ya. It started with Tim and I. We were partnered for a podcasting class at Baruch, and it was our final project, and we had to come up with a long form narrative piece. And we decided to do a commentary on the Grammys of that year and whether or not they were relevant because of the lack of representation that was in it. And we loved it. We loved script writing. We loved talking with people. We loved working together. And we decided we need to keep this going. So Seth, who was also in this class, joined our team and we started building on this idea. And we picked a theme or a topic that society as a culture kind of gets obsesses over, and that's where we got the idea for culture, like cults obsess over a thing. So why do we as a society obsess over these things? Like, what about it can we bring the truth out of, like I was mentioning before? So we've done episodes on the Grammys, on the idea of nostalgia within marketing, and we looked at video games as an example of that. We looked at um, hustle culture, which was our latest episode, and we also looked at Netflix as a streaming service and just kind of holding it accountable and looking into the suspicions that we have of Netflix.
Oh wow! I kind of want to ask you about each of the episodes, but I found myself particularly drawn to the last episode on hustle culture. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what was the intention for that story and the purpose of it?
Right. So hustle culture is kind of this idea that, you know, like people are hustling. We're from New York. People, if anybody knows what a hustle is, it's New Yorkers, okay? And people are constantly, and I especially think in our generation, are constantly working, constantly hustling. This idea of hustling, of putting in the work, of putting down the idea of rest and taking care of your mental state and emotional state, because work has to get done, because I gotta chase this bag, because I need to make this money, because I need to produce, I need to be productive. I need to be more efficient. This kind of idea that my work must be done, my work must continue to be produced. And how hustle culture happens and is reinforced against the idea of rest, against the idea of allowing yourself, allowing your work to rest so that you can continue to create, but to continue to create in a healthy place. And we were producing and creating hustle culture in a super busy semester. It was the end of our independent study, which is where we were producing these episodes of culture, and we were starting to feel it. We were starting to feel all of this work that we had done catching up with us. And we were doing it while taking on classes, while working, while being part of families, while being part of clubs, while being part of church ministries, while trying to pursue our individual goals while dealing with ourselves. Like we were doing so much at the same time as this same thing, so it hit close to home. And all the people that we were speaking to, some of them are close friends of mine, and we just realized we deserve as much as a break as the people who we sympathize with in this episode. And people need rest. That's it. People need time um, to rest, to recharge. Not necessarily recharge, but rest. Not with the intention of launching yourself back into the same way that you've been working, but being able to take a time to recognize what it is that you need and going back into that. There's a lot of talk about like self care and everything like that. And self care has a broader definition, I'm pretty sure people know by now, than like a face mask and a glass of wine at the end of the night. That can be one of the ways that you practice that. But the practice of resting and being able to take time for your mind and for your emotions and your heart to disassociate from this productive nature that hustle culture creates is necessary. And not just in order to create more work, but in order to live, in order to survive. It's just necessary.
Yeah. Right now, with the pandemic, so many of us have had to put down our work. We're forced to slow down, pause, and at least try to rest.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't able to relax because of our circumstances, especially economically.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering how we can get back into a hustle. How can we hustle? What do we need to do? But rest is still crucial. Rest is still important. So I won't say what advice would you give, but what would you say to people who right now are struggling to find rest? A peace of mind.
I think
What's discovered in the podcast? Because I would also like to invite people to check out that episode. So as you talk, I'm going to share the link.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to rest, I hope people don't think that I'm like advocating for you to be like laying down in your bed and lazy and all that stuff. Laziness is different from rest. That's one thing I will say. But I think when it comes to rest, it doesn't need to be a physical thing always. It doesn't need to be like an actual physical thing. Sometimes it means saying no to certain projects or works or jobs that you have to do. Maybe it's not going out with a friend on a night, or maybe it's not engaging in a certain thought process. It's not, sometimes maybe one of the ways that I've learned to engage with, learn to practice resting is by saying, okay, I'm done with work at 5. I am allowing myself another couple hours of like productivity until like 7. Then after 7, it's my time. It's time for me to not think about producing, to not think about creating, to not think about what is next, what is my next hustle. I don't need to be texting somebody up about a project. I don't need to be thinking and engaging with thoughts of production right now, because this is the time for me to rest. And then usually in the times when I realize that I'm resting is moments where ideas come up. And I allow myself, yeah, I'm gonna jot this down until I forget it. But I'm not gonna develop it. I'm not gonna keep doing this, because then what's the point? Because then I'm just lying to myself and I'm not doing it. But when it comes to rest, just find pockets of space and time that you can dedicate to maybe practices that help you rest. Like for me, as a Christian, it's always been like prayer and worship. Those have been moments and times where I have received rest. Or um, just if you are able to talk with your family, talk with close friends. And when I say that, I mean talk with people who feel like rest to you, who allow you to rest in that conversation. And sometimes you don't have the energy or the mind space to have a conversation. And what you need is stillness and silence to just be with yourself for a moment. And that is perfectly fine. That is a completely valid thing for you to do. And I just got off the phone not too long ago with my professor, my mentor, Dr. Danica Kelly. She's amazing. She's an awesome poet. I love her so much. And she literally told me, literally had to like sit down and tell me, I kid you not, this was like less than 2 hours ago. She sat down and told me, she was like, you don't need to keep doing and filling up your time with everything, because then you will not give yourself time to do that everything. It is literally impossible for you to be hustling all the time if all you're doing is hustling. Like you can't do it. It's physically impossible. You are going to crash and burn, and the only one who's going to come out on the horrible side of that is you, right? And then you end up blaming yourself for your lack of productivity, but in reality, it's not your lack of productivity, it's your lack of self-care and rest. And that's the important part of what you need to do. Yes, work. Yes, produce. That's not bad. Doing it in excessive amounts, doing anything in excessive amounts, that is when it becomes borderline abuse to yourself and to the thing that you are dedicated to.
I think that's really important. How we betray ourselves sometimes. For me as a creative, I don't really, I'm a hustler because I'm always working 3 jobs. So I know I hustle. I feel like I'm always searching for the next thing to do, even when I want to relax. This whole summer for me has been about taking a pause. I've decided to be on a sabbatical and I'm enjoying it thoroughly, even though I'm still working part-time, or at least making myself available to work part-time. And even in creating these smaller projects with YouTube, this series and calling on a colleague, I'm finding myself busying about again. And I'm doing things that I'm interested in, I'm passionate about. So it doesn't feel like work. But then if something isn't happening, I'm worried. The anxiety builds up because I'm still finding myself in that hustle mindset.
Yeah.
Like, this has to get done. I have to create. If I'm not producing, I'm not on task. In the middle, a sabbatical is a time period you take a break to work creatively. Of course, I should be working, but I want to remove the shit out of that. Like, I get to be working on something creative and recognize that the best artwork that I can create right now is to focus on my own mental health and well-being, and to focus on centering and prioritizing self-care. And if I'm abandoning that, nothing else matters.
Yeah. So, and it shouldn't be done like, I think the best way to rest, and I feel like rest is such a I automatically have the picture of like me laying down on a hammock somewhere in some Caribbean beach enjoying the sun, because I haven't seen the sun in ages because of this pandemic. But no, like the idea of rest isn't necessarily that, but it's also like, I feel like some people don't allow themselves it because they're not in the position to rest in the way that they would want to, in this dream state idea of the way that they want to. Like, I cannot go to an island and be on a hammock sipping on something and relaxing. That is not my reality. And so some people say, well, if I can't have that, then it's not rest and it's not anything. When you just have to find what you can do, what is available to you. And I know there's people in during this pandemic especially who are not in the financial position to be able to not work, to be able to take a day off, to be able to do that. And like, yeah, that's the reality of a lot of people. And so we have to recognize that and be like, yo, that sucks. I'm sorry. But see if there's on your train ride home a way or time for you to just sit and breathe. Or if there's a time for you at home, if it's not too crazy or too hectic, after the kids are put down, after food is in your stomach, after like your basic needs are met, that you can take a moment and just be like, okay, guess what? I'm not hustling right now. I'm not producing right now. I'm simply existing. And that in itself will be a huge victory, I think.
Finding rest when we're not sleeping, outside of sleeping. Yeah. I feel like sometimes we're afraid to rest because rest looks like stillness. It can be moving, but a lot of times it looks like stillness. And when you're worried about so many things, how can you be still? So yeah, inviting rest. I think it's important. It's scary sometimes. We think about rest, but like you said, it's a paradise. It's always this feel good thing, but not often is it feel good for everyone, especially right now. I can't sit down. I cannot settle my mind. If I fall asleep, it's because I'm physically exhausted, but I don't even understand the concept of rest right now. Like, how can we rest? What does it feel like in my body to be in a rested state?
And so many people don't even know that. Like, I, for one, did not know what it meant to be rested.
Right.
What do you? What do you mean not working? What do you mean not producing? What do you mean? Because I think a lot of people, when they think of hustling, not necessarily to say that it isn't, but they think of um, bettering myself, trying to do the best thing for myself, trying to put myself forward, putting my community, my family, whoever I can forward. And that doesn't mean resting doesn't mean you don't get to do that, but it just means that you're giving yourself the energy and space to do that, right? And yeah, I think that's so true what you said. I remember like going into my first couple of years of college, around the time that we were doing Hustle Culture, that episode, I did not know what rest was. I did not know what rest was. I thought rest was the sleep that I had, the 4 hours of sleep that I was having at night on some days. Sometimes it was an all-nighter type of episode. Sometimes it was just necessary stuff. I think in one of the first like audio files that we did at the end of that episode, when we're all talking about like in what state we were at the end of that episode. In one of them, I was walking or running from the bus to my house, like just having just finished like an interview or something like that. And I remember having to like cut off at one point and then like walk back, and because I like couldn't breathe. I couldn't like think properly. I was just like, okay, we're gonna reflect on this and then we're done. And I was like, okay, what does done mean? What do you mean done? What comes after I'm putting this down? What comes after me putting my hustle down to rest? What does that look like? And that's gonna look like something different for every person according to what kind of rest you need. But finding that out is something that you should do just out of respect to yourself and out of respect of the work and the hustle that you do.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of a quote that's going around right now, and it may be an older quote, but I think it's something along the lines of um, learn to rest instead of quit.
Mm.
Right. And it's that pacing of ourselves that allows us to continue, not necessarily the race, but to go um, the long distance.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. I think definitely a lot of people probably associate rest with quitting and think that any form of stillness, whether whatever it looks like, is a form of quitting, when it's just, I guess, like training ground almost. Like when you work out, you have rest days. You have days where your body literally, in order to prevent you from debilitating yourself, where you have to stop. And the interesting thing about rest days, like just using that analogy, is that sometimes on rest days you feel like you can keep going. There are days on rest days where you are like, nah, I can run another mile. I can keep doing this. Beautiful that you can keep doing that. The only reason you can keep doing that is because you had a rest day.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you had these times. Yes, you built up endurance. Yes, that's brilliant. Your progress, though, will not be hindered by you taking a rest. That was like a word that I had to receive from like so many people in my life, where especially for like people within my generation, where we are young. And like sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it feels like this world will pass us by in an instant if we are not sprinting to keep up with our goals and sprinting to keep up with people who are like in this life with us. But no, things will not leave you behind, because things are all operating on their own timelines and you are operating on your own timeline. And if right now this time is for you to rest, and then that's what it's for. And you just got to be stubborn with yourself about it.
Right. Right. Take this moment to rest. It makes me think about, when you think about rest days, oftentimes they say that your muscles are able to grow when you're resting, when you're sleeping, not necessarily when you're, pushing weights or whatever, even doing yoga, your muscles grow when you're resting. So I think that says a lot too. So I wanted to actually shout out Trisha Hersey, and I talk about her a little bit in my past YouTube video, which I'll share later. But she calls herself the Nap Bishop. She actually started the Nap Ministry, which is fairly popular all over the social media right now.
I need to visit that church. That sounds like a lovely church.
It's not a real church, but yeah. Napping is my religion, so yes, I. But Trisha Hersey, she's a performance artist, a theater maker, an activist, theologian, and a community healer. And she founded the Nap Ministry in 2016. It's an Atlanta-based organization that advocates for rest as a form of resistance and envisions it as a tool, a radical tool for community healing. So yeah, again, just thinking of rest as well, also rest as reparations is a concept, right?
Yes.
Working for a long time. It's
Yes.
time to rest.
Not only that, but then like I think that a lot of times people, when they talk about blackness and they talk about like the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these instances where we see people actively engaging in like radical protest, a lot of times people forget that your joy is a form of protest. It doesn't have to be. We don't need to put that on your joy. We don't have to put that burden on your joy. But the sole fact that Black people exist across this entire world and we live and we thrive and we rest, and that we are not constantly fighting against something, that in itself is a victory. Because I do not need to fight you. What I deserve is not fighting you, right? What I deserve, what Black people deserve, is not a constant fight. That is actually the opposite of what we deserve. What we deserve are these rights, are these things that cannot be taken away from us. And rest is one of those things that people, I feel like, should really start engaging with as a right and not
Yeah.
just as something that is necessary in order to continue on. Like, no, sleep.
Or
No. Cook your favorite meal. Love on the people around you. Uh, Read the book. Read the corny, sappy romance novel book. Um, I don't care. Just do it. Do it. Be safe. Be whole. Be happy. I think that's something that people. It sounds so corny, but like I think it's only corny because it's true. Like we deserve to be fully engaged with our happiness and our joy without considering it to be radical, without considering it to be anything but the happiness that we are existing in that moment.
this makes me think of just enjoying a meal. Like I can't think of the last time I enjoyed my favorite meal in silence. There was always something playing, a podcast, a music station,
Mm-hmm.
television show, some YouTube series, but to just enjoy every bite and savor it and be able to really distinguish the different flavors and tastes because I'm present in the moment. you
Mm-hmm.
know, that's also rest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Feel it falling into your belly and recognize those sensations.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we got to get back to rest. We really do.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So what happens? What
I'm
happens?
hungry now.
I'm over here like, okay, well, I'm gonna turn everything off after this, and eat something and eat it slowly and
Gotta
patiently.
make.
My grandmama told me, you know.
I'm about to make. I'm about to make something. I'm gonna consider that after this.
I don't
If
know
you
what.
give me just 1 second to grab my charger before this.
Yeah, please do. So hey, y'all, thank you for staying with us. We are, more than halfway through the conversation now. And I definitely want to continue to invite you to engage with us in the chat. Shout out to Christoph. Shout out to Krista. All these Kristas in the space. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I have not forgotten about you. And if you missed this conversation, you're coming back later and it's only public on my Facebook page for a few weeks. Remember, you can always find it hosted on YouTube where you can find me at Kymani Jade. Welcome back. Welcome back. So, Kat, I was thinking about what happens next. Like, what happens when the work does end, And also, I'm curious what's going to happen with the podcast, with the Culture Podcast.
Yeah. Culture is, like I said, it's near and dear to my heart. It started with the three of us, myself, Tim, and Seth. Shout out to ya again. I love ya. Um, also say I love you to your friends. I feel like that's necessary. I don't know why, but just like say that. I feel like that can be part of rest as well. Expressing those things and letting them know. But yeah, I think what's next for culture is I think we're gonna be producing more episodes. Our original goal and plan was to create it as a production company of podcasts, so fiction podcasts and all these different kinds. And like we said, mentioned before, I'm not in a rush. I'm not in a rush to create anything, but I do know that these ideas are present, they're true, and I have my goals and my plans, and they have their timelines to create them. So I'm just stepping in them as I come along. So we're going to be producing more episodes. I can't exactly say when, but we are going to be producing more episodes, continuing it on, and maybe producing more shows underneath the Culture Productions umbrella. But yeah, that's just that. These are all things that are going to happen in their time, and as we are all ready to engage with them, as I'm ready to engage with them. So yeah,
as we get out of lockdown.
girl.
That's
Yes.
the first step, right?
First step. Oh God, first step.
Right. So, in what other ways is your work connected to the community, especially as
Mhm.
a lead worshiper?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in a Pentecostal Christian household, and if anybody listening has grown up in a Pentecostal Dominican household, yeah, I know exactly what I am talking about. So we grew up with a deep appreciation of music and specifically worship in my house. We're all like very musically inclined. My mom loves to clap. She can't always do it right, but she loves it. And she's great at it, and I love her for it. Um, my brothers are musicians. I lead worship within my church, and the thing that I love the most about worship is that it is a community activity. You can worship on your own, but it's so beautiful to worship amongst the people, to worship all together. And like worship becomes a singular language, whether it be through a song, whether it be through a dance or a way of life. Like worship just has a way of inviting other people within it, and I love that aspect. So whenever I think about like my community, specifically like my congregation in the church that my parents pastor, Jokareo Ministries, it's never, I never see myself in it alone. I never think of myself as a sole individual reaching out to a community. I think of myself as present and part of that community as we all engage in this together. And that I think is the most beautiful thing because it lets people know that one, they're not alone in whatever they're going through. Because I think we enter into worship carrying things and we leave worship having left those things there and receiving rest and receiving healing and receiving whatever we need to through it. And so I think worship is so powerful in that way. And then I think also in terms of my faith, worship is just a response to like this outpouring that God pours out over us. And so it's like this cyclical kind of thing that goes on. And there's so much peace and joy in that. And experiencing peace and joy within a community, like I said before, is brilliant. It doesn't have to be radical, but it is radical.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, so it may be easy for some of us to lose trust in our spirituality in moments like this. What would you say to those of us whose faith may be wavering?
Yeah. I think that whenever I think of like faith wavering and just going through difficult times, I'm always brought back to like the famous story of Job in the Bible and all the suffering that he went through. And we always get overtold this story so much about, but we always get told it without its wholeness, like I said before, and like holding all of the truth present. I think the story of Job is a perfect example of that. He has all his family stripped away from him. He has all of his livelihood stripped away from them. And for people who are always hustling, I feel like that is perfect example of that. Everything that he ever produced was taken away from him. In terms of his lineage, the children that he had all killed. In terms of the work that he did, all of his livestock was also taken away from him. And what else? That was my mom.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. And yeah, he had all of these things stripped away from him, and I think so many of us like have our identity in what we do instead of who we are and who we pertain to. And I think that in the story of Job, instead of God telling Job, or instead of the Bible depicting a man who's just like, okay, well, guess what? I'm just gonna wait until God gives it back. What the Bible shows us is a man who was allowed to grieve, a man who was allowed to go through his pain, a man who, when his faith was waning, was allowed to stand in that and say, like, my a lot of us don't feel like we should be okay with our faith waning. And it's not a matter of being okay with it. It's one of those things that just is. It exists. There are moments where our faith is weaker. And that's where we lean on people of like faith. That's where we lean on other members of our community. That's where we lean on our knowledge of God and who He is. And I love this moment in the Bible where Job is literally screaming at God. He's literally like like heartbroken before God. And he's like, why is this happening? What have I done wrong? And he changes his tone to be almost accusatory. And instead of God saying, everything will be okay, everything will be fine, what he does is that he then asks Job a question. He goes, where were you when I created the foundation of the earth? Where were you when I created the sun and the sky? Where were you when I told the sea that it will no longer pass by a certain point? And instead of saying that Job's grief and his pain is irrelevant or invalid, he simply presents his sovereignty as greater than his issues, as in control of his issues. He presents himself as the creator and the sustainer that he is. So for people who are in the Christian faith, I definitely say that trusting in like God's sovereignty and his place as someone who provides is something that I always come back to. Even when I don't believe it, I just allow myself to be presented before it and trust in it. And I think that's a lot of what faith is. And for people who are not Christian, people who are of different faiths or simply believe more so in like their work or things like that, stand before the truths that you know and recognize those things and recognize that those things are true in despite of everything. And again, that's the beauty of truth. It neglects any erred thinking that comes before it. If something is wrong, when it comes before truth, it's going to be clear and evident. So if your faith is waning, if your spirituality is waning, place it before the truth of your spirituality, the truth of your faith. And you should feel some form of encouragement from there. And yeah, it's not a daily, it's not going to be from one day to another that you're suddenly going to be fine. It's a daily practice, but that's perfectly fine.
Okay, well, we're nearing to the hour, but I know you wanted to have a conversation about a very important topic. So I'm going to wrap up with two other questions. You spoke a lot to your own practices of self-care. You also shared with me that your mom, hi mom, she was here a few moments ago.
Yeah.
You shared with me that your mother is both a psychologist and a pastor and served as a missionary in Cuba for the past 20 years or for 20 years, right?
15 to 20 years, yeah.
20 years.
It was 15. It was 15.
Okay, 15 years.
I like subtracted from my age. And I'm like, when was I conscious enough to remember? Okay.
So what have been some of the lessons she has brought back and shared with you? And what is the greatest advice your mother has given you?
My mother is, just disclaimer, my mom is awesome. My mom is one of my favorite people on the face of the planet. Even when she's opening the door to my interviews, and even when she's everything that she is, she's my favorite person ever. And a lot of the healing that I've experienced ended up sounding exactly like things my mother told me, like things that I ended up finding out for myself. I think that happens to a lot of us as we get older. Like a lot of the things that our parents or elders or people that we admire end up telling us, we end up seeing our experiences sum up to those things that they said. And we're just like, oh, dang, they right. But one of the main things that my mother has told me or passed down to me is the realization and the affirmation that I am loved, that I am a beloved person. And I think that may seem like oh, that's cute, but it's a jarring reality to walk through life knowing that you are loved and that being loved results in certain actions and certain things. You are a beloved individual, that I am loved by my family, by my God, by myself. Like I myself have to learn how to love myself. And that is something that gets heard of. Oh, you hear it a lot nowadays, but within the practice of it, you realize how difficult it is. And it's such a privilege to be able to recognize that, to be able to hold that. And a lot of um, trauma and a lot of pain within myself gets healed in front of that truth. So that's definitely something that my mother had to figure out for herself in her life, and that she has passed down to me. That, listen, you love yourself, therefore what? Right? I love myself, therefore I will not tolerate a certain amount of disrespect. I love myself, therefore I will not tolerate a certain amount of disrespect from myself. Um, I love myself, therefore I will rest. Therefore I will take care of myself. Therefore I will do things that make me happy and sustain this. And realizing that your love, I realized, makes opens the door for people who will recognize that within you, recognize the way that you love yourself, and will love you in that similar way, or love you in the way that they can, and match that kind of level. Like when it comes to partners, like my long-term partner, he, right off the gate, I was just like, you can't play with me. Sorry. I can't, I'm not accepting anything above this level that I am at. And as I increase, I'm also need you to increase.
Yeah.
You for yourself and also for me. And that has been like something that's been very true all throughout our relationship and the way that I regard my community. Um, I love myself, and so I love people who have made me who I am. I love these people who surround me, who are reflections of who I am and who my family is, who everything that I am. So I will love you in that same way that I love myself. And that is where like all this respect and this growth can happen within our communities. So yeah.
Once again, thank you for that. Just dropping gems. I exist eternally being loved. I am enveloped and wrapped in that.
Yep.
Yeah, powerful words.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna close out, y'all. We're gonna close out. Just stay with us for about 7 to 10 more minutes. It was really important to Katherine that we take some time to amplify the End SARS movement. And she actually wrote up a little information about this movement, and I wanted to briefly share that with you. So Katherine writes, for years, the name SARS hung in the air here in Nigeria like a putrid fog, writes Nigerian award-winning author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie in her recent New York Times article, Nigeria is Murdering Its Citizens. The End SARS movement that has lit up across social media platforms, raising awareness to the police brutality that has been taking place in Nigeria for years. It is evidence that the government-sanctioned violence against Black people is a diasporic horror and requires the full voice of the diaspora and its allies to fight against it. End SARS protests have been happening since 2016, when young Nigerian men were being attacked, wrongfully arrested, and conned into overpaying for their release. Nigerian police have fired and killed protesters during demonstrations. Organizations like Feminist Coalition, a group of feminist Nigerian women, have raised funds to protect, feed, and provide legal aid to protesters. So I ask today is that you amplify some of the information we're about to share, and also the posts and articles that you may come across to raise awareness about the massacre of Nigerian lives by SARS. We also ask that you take time to educate yourself and others about the situation through various accounts and articles that are covering the issue, and put in the effort and research to learn and engage with these realities. So can you tell us a little bit more about SARS, what it stands for? And as you do, I will share the links that you provided for our viewers.
Yes, of course. So I think a lot of people are seeing the End SARS hashtag all around social media, and SARS is a Nigerian Anti-Robbery Association that was started by the government in order to stop robberies happening in Nigeria. However, they have been wrongfully profiling and attacking young Nigerian men. And the result of that is too closely similar to what we see here in the United States with police brutality and the ending of um, young Black lives. And it the same way and in the same spirit that so many people here in the US showed out and provided support and amplified the voices of protesters and organizers during the Black Lives Matter movement is the same energy, it's the same spirit that needs to be going up for the NSARS campaign that's going on. The way that Black people are attacked all across the globe is like I said before, like I said in the written piece, is evident of how Black people are treated. It's something that requires all of the diaspora and all of its allies to show out for it as well. So I definitely urge people to be more informed, to read up on it, to follow the accounts and articles that I provided below, and to do more research on your own. There's there's a level of care and emphasis that is required for people to do their own research. That is part of you caring. That is part of you showing out. Is you taking the time and researching and finding out, and that will lead to action. That I truly believe that you putting in the work to find out what is going on will lead to the spurring of action for me, whether it be protests, whether it be donations, whether it be um, online activism or anything. It's about making sure that people are aware that this is something that needs to end. I believe the NSARS movement is asking for the removal of the Nigerian president in response to the lack of work done against SARS. And so we want to support the people in that task and support the people in that call for action.
Thank you. So one of the organizations that you talked about in your write-up is the Feminist Coalition. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about them and what they're doing on the ground?
The Feminist Coalition is a group of feminist Nigerian women who are providing legal aid, food, shelter, and provisions to protesters in Nigeria. They're a grassroots movement, and they receive donations from all across the world, and they use that and channel it into this movement and into these protesters, and use the funds for those reasons. And we, for a very long time, have overlooked Black women in every area of every protest of everywhere in the world. And I think it's so important to amplify these women who are actively doing this work, because it's just a way of doing what needs to be done, doing what is right, and a way of not falling into the horrible practice of ignoring Black women when they ask and call out things for what they are. Um, so yeah, one of the things I love about Feminist Coalition is that they hold a transparency that is not present in um, a lot of like leaders that we see today. They're receiving donations. They're explicit about the donations they receive and how it's being used. They post up informationals in their Instagram feed about what their money is going to, what they have done for it, how much is left over, if they need more, um, which usually they always do. And yeah, and I think that kind of transparency helps trust these people, helps these people to know that what they're doing is for the community and for the lives of all Black people.
Right. And in the past 3 days, they fundraised and raised about 43,000 US dollars, which is just incredible. So I've shared their information in the links. Thank you again, Kat, for providing that information and giving us such an extensive review of what is going on with SARS. And I wanted to also reshare some information provided by Therapy for Black Girls, which is an online platform and I talk about them a little bit in the video that I'll share as well later, an online platform that is promoting the mental health of Black women and Black girls. So recently, and if you're on my Facebook page, you can scroll down later and you'll see that share. I left it public for those of you who are coming from Instagram or YouTube to view. So they talked about the Crisis Prevention Center MANI, which is a mentally aware Nigerian initiative, again on the ground in Nigeria, providing mental health support. And they're here on Facebook at Mentally Aware NG, one word. And so I've shared their information and actually tagged them in the comments section. So you'll see that there. And also doing similar work is a youth-led NGO, Stand to End Rape, STIR. And they're here on Facebook at Stand to End Rape, at Stand to End Rape. So I'm gonna post their information for you in the comments section to check out. So if you know of anybody who may need counseling support or to talk with a therapist, these are two Facebook pages that you can go to for resources. And also, I wanted to share with you an event coming up next Wednesday that's being hosted by the Black LGBTQIA plus Migrant Project. And it's, interestingly enough, it's called the Inherited Struggle. And I'll share the link for the event first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what the event will entail. So give me 1 second. Let's copy it like this.
Yeah, and while Kymani's doing that, just to speak on the importance of making sure to do the research and following accounts of people who have been speaking about the NSARS movement for a while now. Like I said before, like was written before, NSARS protests have been happening since 2016, right? So this isn't something that's just starting out within these past few months. It's something that has constantly been spoken about. And a lot of times when it comes to the struggles of Black people, it's something that usually has been spoken about for a while. And usually it's one instance, one problem, one surgence of issues or brutality that causes worldwide attention to arrive to it. So which means that you'll be able to find people whose accounts, whose work will speak to these issues and have been speaking about these issues forever. So I urge you to please find those accounts, find those people, do the research and see what we can do, how to support them, how to emphasize their work.
Thank you. Yeah. So, as I stated, the BLMP event is called the Inherited Struggle. So BLMP, the Black LGBTQIA plus Migrant Project, is an internationalist organization. And I'm going to read their actual statement. So what they wrote is an international organization, which means we recognize the fight for liberation as a global fight, and we combat US-centric framing of working class struggles. On Wednesday, October 28th, next Wednesday at 11 a.m., 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are hosting a webinar titled The Inherited Struggle, the Fight Against Police Terrorism and the State Repression throughout the diaspora. And we would love to have you join us. During the webinar, we will hear from activists, organizers, and revolutionaries in Honduras, Nigeria, South Africa, and the US who are facing and fighting police brutality in their respective countries. We want to understand the similarities and differences about the conditions across our borders because our struggle is only successful if it is rooted in solidarity. So if you have any questions for the panelists, you can actually send them straight to tribe@blmp.org. So I'll drop that in the comments section too. And we are at the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for staying with us. This was a wonderful conversation as usual, Kat. I love talking with you. I love listening and just hearing you speak.
Likewise.
So thank you. I want to thank those of you who have stayed with us throughout this entire call and who will be joining us later. Thank you so much for helping us co-create communities of care and collective consciousness. We want to invite you to stay with us, to not only stay tuned for our next projects as we rest and rejuvenate and get ready for the next things in our lives, but to also follow us on our socials. So Katherine, what are the ways that you love to connect with with people?
Honestly, the best way to connect with people for me is through my Instagram page. You can follow me at _cat with a K, and that's all one word, all lowercase, CATWITHAK. Yeah, I am currently working on a collection of poetry that was mentioned before, so please on the lookout for that. Um, yeah, but I think the best way, not even just to promote my own work, but just please be sure to follow and be conscious of more Afro Latino creators, of Black Latino, Latinx uh, writers, creators, musicians, everything. It can only enrich more your consumption of media, your consumption of art, of literature, and I definitely would love for all of that. So, search up some more Afro Latinos.
Yep. Learn a little bit more about Arturo Schomburg, who has
Yeah.
mega library on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. You know,
Mhm.
for those of us in Harlem, it would be a shame to have such this incredible space right in the heart of Harlem, and we just pass by it every day. And we don't even learn about the person who it's named after.
Yeah, definitely. If you would like to learn more about some Afro Latinos that maybe you have or have not heard of, on my IG page, I did an entire kind of research into different Afro Latinx for Hispanic Heritage Month. So every single day there is a Afro Latinx that you can look into some more. A we have models, we have activists, we have bibliophiles, we have singers, artists, indigenous people. So check that out if you're interested.
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely gonna check out myself for sure. So, as far as I go, you can find me on every social media wave at Kymani Jade and on YouTube at Kymani Jade. So you just type that right into the YouTube search engine and you will find me there. Facebook is encouraging me to send to you my Facebook page, but you don't really want to go there yet. It's not fully developed. So I'm just going to give you my handle. Come on, Facebook. Let me do my own thing. I got this. They're just like, no, don't you mean this? Okay. All right. Yeah. And I want to invite you also to check out some of my last videos. In particular, the last conversation calling on a colleague with Alton McCall, where we talked about Sankofa, ancestry healing, history and healing, which I think is a very similar conversation. I'm going to share the link to my YouTube page so you can click on it directly, and also the video that I'm referring to. So give me 1 second to get that into the comment section. And I also want to invite you to check out my latest video on my latest video that showcases 10 different Black women who are doing great work in mental health and emotional justice. If you're interested in following them, if you haven't already, yes, please check out this video. Therapy for Black folks by Black women. So, wait, let me share the Sankofa video first. And that's all, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to get you those links in just a minute as we wrap up, but I don't want to take up too much more time. It's been about 1.5 hours now already. So, Kat, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we see each other again. I know you've graduated. I still got another 7 years at Baruch as I try to figure out this graduate program, but it was beautiful to meet you and to know you now. And I'll be following you on Instagram.
Yes.
And looking forward to your book and everything else that you create online. And hopefully, again, we get in person. We're allowed to go outside for longer periods than just,
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here, for opening up a space for this conversation, and just for all the brilliant work that you do. And I hope that you find a beautiful balance between it and rest for you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. That is a prayer in and of itself. All right. Well, take care, everyone. Peace.